The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as May parked her 10-year-old Honda Civic in front of Rio Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy. She sat for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, and drew in a deep breath. The brand-new white GI folded neatly on the passenger seat seemed to mock her. What was a 34-year-old accountant with no real athletic background doing here? People like her didn't take up martial arts in their 30s, but people like her didn't usually get cornered in parking garages either. 3 months ago, that incident had changed everything. Walking to her car after working late, May had found herself trapped between two men demanding her purse, her phone, and worse. She'd escaped only because a security guard happened to walk by. The close call left her shaken, unable to sleep, jumping at shadows. After 2 weeks of barely functioning, she'd made up her mind. Never again would she feel that helpless. Now here she was, the knot in her stomach tightening as she watched people, mostly men in their 20s with athletic builds, walking confidently through the academy's front door. Through the large windows, she could see others already on the mats, grappling with an ease that seemed impossible. Just one class, she whispered to herself. Just try one class. May gathered the GI, her water bottle, and what remained of her courage. As a single mother of 2 teenagers who worked full-time while also caring for her father, she'd faced plenty of challenges. But something about walking into that room of strangers made her palms sweat and her heart race in a way that quarterly tax deadlines never had. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and a blast of air conditioning hit her along with the distinctive smell of athletic tape, sweat, and cleaning products. The front desk was staffed by a woman with a purple belt tied around her waist who looked up and smiled. "First time?" she asked, noticing the pristine gi in May's arms. May nodded, trying not to look as out of place as she felt. "I called yesterday. I'm signed up for the beginner's class at 10. Right. I'm Tanya. Let me get you set up with some paperwork, and I'll show you where you can change." As May filled out liability forms, more people filtered in, some nodding hello, others too focused on their upcoming training to notice her. Most seemed younger, fitter, and infinitely more confident. A group of men near the water cooler laughed loudly at some shared joke, occasionally glancing her way. What none of them knew, what no one except her children knew, was that May wasn't starting entirely from zero. For the past 10 years, she'd been the primary caregiver for her father, who had once been a championship wrestler before a stroke had left him partially paralyzed. During his better days, especially in the earlier years, he'd shared his knowledge with her. It had started as a way to pass time during long afternoons of care. "Let me show you how to break a grip," he'd say, or "This is how you keep your balance when someone pushes you." Simple things demonstrated from his wheelchair or bed. That had seemed like nothing more than a way to humor an old man who missed his glory days. Tanya showed her to the women's changing room, which was mercifully empty. May changed quickly, fumbling with the unfamiliar GI and belt. Her father had shown her how to tie one properly. One of his friends had been a judoka, but her nervous fingers kept bungling the knot. After the third attempt, she managed something that would stay tied and looked at herself in the full-length mirror. The GI was slightly too big, making her look even smaller than her 5'4" frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and without makeup she looked tired. The past few years had etched fine lines around her eyes that no amount of expensive cream seemed to erase. "You can do this," she told her reflection, not entirely convinced. When she walked onto the mats barefoot, the sensation was strange, springy but firm. The head instructor, Coach Rodriguez, was a stocky man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard sprinkled with gray. He called the class to attention, and May tried to blend into the back row of the 15 or so students. "We have a new face today," he said, and May felt every eye turn toward her. "Everyone welcome, May. Remember, we were all white belts once. Let's show her what our community is about." There were nods and a few friendly smiles, but also some looks that clearly said, "She won't last a week." The warm-up nearly killed her. Jumping jacks, push-ups, squats, and strange movements called shrimping that had her scooting backward across the mat on her side. By the time they finished, May was red-faced and breathing hard, certain she'd made a terrible mistake. Then came the technical portion. Coach Rodriguez demonstrated a basic escape from being pinned on the ground, a movement called bridging and rolling. As May watched, something clicked. She'd seen this before. You bridge when they're high, not when they're low, her father had told her once, demonstrating with his hands when his body couldn't. Feel their weight shift, then move. When it came time to practice with partners, May was paired with a friendly woman named Lynn, who had been training for about 6 months. Don't worry about getting it perfect, Lynn said as they took turns being the person on top. Nobody does at first. But when it was May's turn to escape, muscle memory from those impromptu lessons with her father kicked in. She bridged at exactly the right moment, rolled smoothly, and suddenly found herself in the dominant position, looking down at Lynn's surprised face. Wow, Lynn said. Are you sure you haven't done this before? May shook her head, equally surprised. Beginner's luck, I guess. It wasn't all so easy. The next technique, a collar choke from a position called guard, left her confused and clumsy. Her fingers, strong from years of typing but unused to this kind of grip, cramped painfully. Sweat dripped into her eyes and her GI felt increasingly like a weighted blanket as it soaked up moisture. From across the room, she noticed a man with a black belt watching her, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he quickly looked away, turning to speak to a younger student. Something in his dismissive body language made May's stomach tighten. She'd seen that look before, in boardrooms, at parent-teacher conferences, in bank offices when applying for loans. It was a look that said, "You don't belong here." By the end of the hour-and-a-half class, every muscle in May's body screamed for mercy. As students bowed out and began to leave the mats, Coach Rodriguez approached her. "How did you find your first class?" he asked. "Harder than I expected," May admitted, massaging her forearm. "But good. Really good." He nodded approvingly. "You move well for a beginner. There's a natural understanding of weight distribution there." May almost told him about her father then, but something held her back. She didn't want special treatment or to be seen as trading on her father's reputation. Whatever respect she earned here, she wanted it to be her own. "Thank you," she said instead. "I'll be back on Wednesday." His eyebrows rose slightly. Most people need a few days to recover after their first class. May thought of the parking garage, of the helplessness, of her children who needed her to be strong. "I'll ice whatever hurts and be back Wednesday." As she walked to the changing room, she overheard 2 men talking, not quite quietly enough. "Another one-class wonder," one said. "Office workers always think they can just walk in and become fighters overnight." "At least she's not as bad as that guy last week," the other replied with a chuckle. "Remember how he couldn't even do a forward roll?" Mee kept walking, her face burning but her resolve hardening. Little did they know that when she got home, she would pull up instructional videos online. She would practice the movements in her living room after her kids went to bed. And next time her father had a good day, she would ask him about guard positions and escapes. In the shower at home later, watching bruises already blooming on her arms, May felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Pride. Not the quiet satisfaction of balancing a difficult client's books or successfully negotiating a payment plan for her father's medical bills, but a raw, physical accomplishment. Her phone pinged with a text from her son. "How was ninja training, Mom?" She smiled, typing back, "Your mom is definitely not a ninja, but she's going to keep trying." That night, for the first time in months, she slept without dreaming of parking garages or shadowy figures. Instead, she dreamed of movements, of balance, of the strange new world opening up before her. And in her dream, she was flowing across the mats with a confidence that felt like both a memory and a promise. 1 class down. Many more to go. 3 weeks into her training, May realized that walking through the doors of Rio Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy no longer made her heart race with anxiety. The unfamiliar had become routine. The smell of the mats, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. The peculiar language of positions and submissions that once sounded like nonsense now made a strange kind of sense. What hadn't changed, however, were the sidelong glances and whispered comments that followed her like an unwelcome shadow. "You're tying your belt wrong again," said a stocky guy with a purple belt as May prepared for the evening class. His name was Trevor, and he seemed to take personal offense at her presence. "Loop it through twice before you cross it." May nodded politely, though she knew perfectly well how to tie her belt. Her fingers had fumbled because she'd rushed from work, barely making it in time after her boss had dumped a last-minute tax filing on her desk at 4:45 p.m. "Thanks," she said quietly, fixing the knot properly. "Just trying to help," Trevor replied with a smirk that suggested otherwise. Basics matter, you know. As she joined the line of students on the mat, May felt the familiar weight of being the outsider. At 34, she was at least a decade older than most beginners. As one of only 3 women in the class, she stood out even more. And as the only person who arrived in business clothes before changing into her GI, she might as well have had "doesn't belong" stamped on her forehead. Coach Rodriguez called the class to attention, and they began the warm-up routine. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and the dreaded shrimping drill that still made her feel like a fish flopping on the deck of a boat. May had been doing extra core workouts at home, and while her muscles still burned, she no longer felt like she might die before the warm-up ended. "Look at her form," she heard someone mutter during the hip escape drill, moving like she's underwater. May kept her eyes forward and continued. The comment stung, but she hadn't come here to make friends. She'd come here to make sure she never felt helpless again. Today's technique was a sweep from the guard position, a move to turn the tables when someone was on top of you. Coach Rodriguez demonstrated with his assistant, making the complex movement look as easy as rolling out of bed. "It's all about timing and leverage," he explained, "not strength." When they paired up to practice, May found herself facing Jin, a college student who'd started just a week before her but moved with the natural athleticism of someone who'd played sports all his life. "I'll go easy," he said, with the confidence of youth. "Just let me know if I'm too heavy." Something about his tone, not unkind but unconsciously condescending, stirred a quiet determination in May. She nodded and took her position on her back, establishing her guard as Coach had shown. The first few attempts at the sweep went nowhere. Jin was solid and balanced, anticipating her movements. Sweat beaded on her forehead as frustration mounted. Then she remembered something her father had shown her years ago. "Never fight force with force," he'd said, demonstrating with his hands when his body couldn't show her properly. "Create emptiness where they expect resistance." On the next attempt, when Jin pushed forward instead of pushing back, May yielded. She shifted her hips slightly, redirecting his momentum while simultaneously sweeping his leg. For a brief moment, Jin's expression of surprise was almost comical. Then he was falling, and May was smoothly transitioning to mount position, exactly as Coach had demonstrated. "Whoa," Jin said, genuine respect in his voice. "That was perfect. How did you do that?" Before she could answer, a shadow fell across the mat. Dylan Chen, the Academy's star student and recently promoted black belt, stood watching them with arms crossed. At 28, Dylan had already won several regional championships and ran the competition training program at the gym. "You got lucky," he said flatly to May. "Jin was being nice and gave you that sweep." Jin opened his mouth as if to contradict this, but one look from Dylan silenced him. "Let me show you what happens when your partner isn't just humoring you," Dylan continued, kneeling down to take Jin's place. A hush fell over the nearby pairs as Dylan established himself in May's guard. He was heavier than Jin by at least 30 pounds, all of it muscle, and May felt suddenly small beneath him. "Go ahead," he said. "Try your sweep." May attempted the move, but it was like trying to sweep a boulder. Dylan didn't budge an inch. After 3 failed attempts, he effortlessly passed her guard, established side control, and applied pressure that made breathing difficult. "This is reality," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "No magic techniques. Just years of hard work that some people aren't willing to put in." The message was clear. People like May were wasting everyone's time. When he finally let her up, May's face burned with embarrassment. She caught Coach Rodriguez watching from across the room, a frown creasing his forehead. After class, while most students hurried to the showers or gathered in chatting groups, May stayed behind, quietly approaching Coach. "I'd like to drill that sweep more," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I think I'm missing something in the technique." Coach Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Most people just want to know why they couldn't beat the black belt. You want to know how to fix your technique? That's good." For 20 minutes after class, he broke down the sweep in greater detail, showing her subtleties that hadn't been covered in the main lesson. May absorbed everything, asking questions that surprised him with their insight. "You understand concepts faster than most beginners," he observed, "but understanding and doing are different things. Only mat time closes that gap." "Then I'll get more mat time," May replied simply. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. May attended class 3 times a week without fail. The whispers and sideways glances continued. Some days were worse than others. Isn't there a yoga class you could take instead? Trevor suggested after May struggled with a complex guard retention drill. Might suit you better. Perhaps you could teach it, she replied mildly. You seem very flexible in your thinking. A few people who overheard chuckled and Trevor's face darkened. It was the first time she'd pushed back, and while it felt good momentarily, she knew she'd made an enemy. Dylan's disdain became more pronounced. As the Academy's highest-ranked competitor, his opinion carried weight and his attitude toward May influenced others. Whenever she was paired with newer, athletic men, they seemed to feel they needed to prove something by dominating the small, middle-aged woman in training. Yet through it all, May continued her secret regimen. 3 nights a week after putting her kids to bed, she rolled out a small mat in her living room and drilled movements for an hour. She watched instructional videos with the same intensity she'd once applied to studying for her accounting certification. And every Sunday afternoon she visited her father at his care facility, where on his good days he would watch her movements and offer quiet corrections. Lower your base, he would say. Don't reach so far. Feel the weight shift before you move. Simple principles, yet they made all the difference. One evening, about 2 months after she'd started, May stayed late again to work with Coach Rodriguez. As they drilled a guard recovery technique, Dylan emerged from the office, gym bag in hand. He paused, watching them work. You're wasting your time, Coach, he said finally. Some people just don't have what it takes. Coach Rodriguez straightened up, fixing Dylan with a level gaze. Everyone starts somewhere. Even you were a white belt once. Some white belts become black belts, Dylan replied. Others just become blue belts who quit. We both know which one she is. After he left, a heavy silence hung in the air. I'm sorry about that, Coach said finally. May shook her head. Don't be. He's not entirely wrong. Coach raised an eyebrow and she continued. I'm not a natural athlete. I'm not young. I don't have 8 hours a day to train. So yes, maybe I won't ever be a black belt. She paused, meeting his eyes. But that doesn't mean I'm wasting my time. Or yours. Something shifted in Coach's expression, a new respect perhaps. Want to know a secret? He asked. Most people who walk through that door never make it to blue belt. They quit when it gets hard. But you, he tapped his temple. You have something up here that matters more than being young or athletic. You have persistence. That night, driving home with muscles aching and Dylan's words still ringing in her ears, May stopped at a red light and caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who had sat paralyzed with fear in this same car 3 months ago. There was a steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. A quiet confidence that had nothing to do with arrogance and everything to do with the slow, painful process of discovering what she was capable of. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. Pizza for dinner? May smiled, typing back, already ordered. Be home in 10. The light turned green and she drove on, already mentally reviewing the sweep she'd been working on. Tomorrow was another day, another class. Another chance to prove, not to Dylan or Trevor or anyone else, but to herself, that she belonged exactly where she'd chosen to be. The outsider was slowly finding her place. The digital clock on May's nightstand glowed 11:43 p.m. As she replayed the instructional video for the 3rd time, her eyes burned with fatigue, but she focused intently on the details of the collar choke being demonstrated. The living room furniture had been pushed against the walls to make space for the small training mat her children had given her for her birthday, so you can practice without bruising. Your knees on the hardwood, her son had said, or months had passed since her first day at Rio Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy. 4 months of sore muscles, bruised pride, and slow, often imperceptible progress. To most people at the gym, May was still that middle-aged woman who showed up regularly but remained firmly average. Someone who worked hard but lacked natural talent. What they didn't see were nights like this. After tucking her kids into bed, finishing household chores, and preparing for the next workday, May dedicated this precious hour to honing her skills. Tonight she was drilling a sequence: collar grip, sleeve control, hip escape, sweep, mount, collar choke. Over and over, working against an imaginary opponent, committing the movements to muscle memory. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was Wei, her 15-year-old son. Mom, I can hear you thumping around. School tomorrow, remember? May smiled ruefully and texted back. Sorry, last drill. Then sleep. She completed the sequence once more, paying special attention to the transition from sweep to mount, the part where she often hesitated in live training. Then she rolled up her mat, pushed the furniture back into place, and headed for a quick shower. As warm water sluiced over her aching body, May cataloged the changes of the past 4 months. Her forearms were stronger from gripping the GI. Her core had tightened from countless hip escapes and bridges. The panic attacks that had plagued her since the parking garage incident had all but disappeared. She still wasn't winning many rounds during sparring, but she no longer felt helpless beneath her training partners. Progress was happening, even if no one else could see it yet. The next day at the academy, May arrived 15 minutes early, as had become her habit. The previous class was just finishing up, advanced students drilling competition techniques. She sat on a bench to change her shoes, watching Dylan lead a small group through a complex guard-passing drill. His movement was undeniably beautiful, effortless, precise, flowing. For all his arrogance, his skill was genuine. Sometimes May wondered what it would be like to move with such confidence, to have technique so ingrained that it looked like art rather than effort. Quite something to watch, isn't he? Said a quiet voice beside her. May turned to find Coach Rodriguez settling onto the bench, his eyes also on Dylan. He is, she agreed. Though I could do without the running commentary on my worthlessness. Coach chuckled. Dylan has his own journey. Don't let it interfere with yours. He glanced at her gym bag. Speaking of which, you've been putting in extra work. I can tell. Heat rose to May's cheeks. Just trying to catch up. It's showing. Not in the obvious ways yet, but in the details. Your base is more solid. Your grips are more purposeful. He nodded toward the mat where the advanced class was dispersing. Ready to work on that sweep defense before class? For nearly 2 months now, Coach Rodriguez had been giving May 10 or 15 minutes of instruction before or after regular classes. Small adjustments to her technique, insights that weren't covered in the general curriculum. He never mentioned these sessions to anyone else, and neither did she. As they drilled on the far corner of the mat, May was acutely aware of Dylan gathering his gear nearby, his dismissive glance sliding over them before he headed to the changing room. A few other early arrivals for the next class were warming up, including Trevor, who never missed an opportunity to remind May of her outsider status. Getting private lessons now? He called over. Must be nice to have special treatment. Coach Rodriguez didn't even look up. Open mat before classes for everyone, Trevor. Feel free to join us if you want to work on your sweep defense too. Trevor muttered something under his breath but didn't approach. By the time class officially started, May had already worked up a sweat. Today's focus was on escapes from side control, a position where she frequently found herself trapped during sparring. As Coach demonstrated the technique with his assistant, May noticed details she would have missed 4 months ago. The precise angle of the hip, the timing of the bridge, the importance of creating space before attempting to recover guard. When they paired up to drill, May found herself working with Lily, one of the few other women in the class and a 4-stripe white belt close to promotion. I've noticed you staying late to work with Coach, Lily said as they took turns practicing the escape. That's dedication. Just trying to keep up, May replied, executing the movement with careful precision. Lily raised an eyebrow. You're doing more than keeping up. Your technique has improved a lot lately. It was the first time anyone besides Coach had acknowledged her progress, and May felt a small glow of pride. Maybe her late nights and extra drills were paying off after all. The real test came during the sparring portion of class, 5-minute rounds with rotating partners, starting from the knees. May's first opponent was a new white belt, a college athlete who relied more on strength than technique. In the past, his raw power would have overwhelmed her. Today, she surprised herself by maintaining her guard, controlling his posture and even attempting a sweep that nearly succeeded. They reset, and this time when he charged forward, May used his momentum against him, just as her father had taught her. A slight redirect of force, a well-timed hip movement, and suddenly she was taking his back. The look of shock on his face was almost comical. Before she could secure her hooks for full back control, the timer buzzed. Switch partners. Coach called. Her next opponent was Trevor. His expression made it clear he'd been watching her previous round and wasn't pleased by what he'd seen. Beginner's luck with the new guy, he said as they slapped hands to start. Let's see how you handle someone who knows what they're doing. What followed was 5 minutes of pressure and technical bullying. Trevor used his knowledge to put May in uncomfortable positions, applying just enough force to make her work hard but not enough to give her an opening for the techniques she'd been practicing. By the round's end, she was gasping for breath, pinned under his side control. Still a long way to go, he said with a smirk as they separated. May nodded, too winded to reply. He wasn't wrong, she did have a long way to go. But what Trevor didn't understand was that she wasn't measuring her progress against him or anyone else. She was measuring it against the woman who had walked into the academy 4 months ago, terrified and unsure. That evening, May made her weekly Sunday visit to her father's care facility. Nobuo Chen sat in his wheelchair by the window, a chessboard set up on the table before him. At 68, his body was frail from the stroke that had partially paralyzed his left side, but his mind remained sharp on good days. Today, judging by the complex position on the chessboard, was a good day. "You've been training," he said after they'd exchanged greetings. It wasn't a question, May smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "You move differently, more centered." He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Show me what you're working on." For the next hour, May demonstrated the techniques she'd been learning, using slow, controlled movements to avoid straining her father's limited space. Nobuo watched with the keen eye of someone who had once been among the best in the world, offering small corrections and insights. "Your sweep isn't working because you're trying to move them," he explained when May described her struggles. "Don't move them, move yourself under them. Create space, then fill it." He demonstrated with his hands, his damaged left arm moving just enough to illustrate the principle. May watched intently, then mimicked the movement. "Yes," he said with quiet satisfaction. "Just like that." On the drive home, May found herself thinking about the upcoming belt promotion test. White belts who showed sufficient progress would be eligible for their blue belts, the first major milestone in a journey that typically took a decade to reach black belt. Coach Rodriguez hadn't mentioned it to her directly, but she'd overheard others discussing their preparations. Did she even have a chance? Dylan would certainly argue no. Trevor and his friends would laugh at the very idea. Even Lily, who had been supportive, had been training nearly a year longer than May, yet something in her refused to be discouraged. The same stubborn persistence that had gotten her through college while working full-time, that had helped her raise 2 children alone after her husband left, that had enabled her to care for her father through his illness. That same quiet strength told her to keep going, regardless of what anyone thought. That night, after the kids were asleep, May rolled out her mat once more. As she moved through the techniques, she focused on her father's words. Don't move them. Move yourself. Create space, then fill it. Outside her window, the moon cast long shadows across her living room floor. To anyone passing by, they might have seen just a middle-aged woman going through strange movements alone at midnight. What they couldn't see was the fighter slowly emerging from within, one patient drill at a time. 6 months into her jiu-jitsu journey, May arrived at the academy for the Saturday morning open mat session. Unlike regular classes with structured drills and instruction, open mat was unstructured training time, a chance for students to practice techniques, work on problem areas, or spar with different partners. For newer students like May, it was sometimes intimidating, but Coach Rodriguez had encouraged her to attend. "That's where the real learning happens," he'd told her, "when you have to solve problems without someone telling you exactly what to do." The gym was already buzzing with activity when she walked in. About 20 students of various belt levels were spread across the mats. Some were drilling specific movements in pairs, others were engaged in light technical sparring, and a small group was gathered around Dylan, who appeared to be demonstrating a complex submission setup. May found a quiet corner to stretch and warm up. As she moved through her routine, she mentally reviewed the techniques she wanted to work on today. Escapes from mount. The sweep coach had shown her last week, and perhaps some guard retention drills if she could find a willing partner. Lily spotted her and waved, coming over after finishing a round of sparring with another blue belt. "Hey," she said, dropping down beside May to catch her breath. "Good to see you at open mat." Most white belts avoid these sessions like the plague. May smiled. "I need the practice more than most." "Don't we all?" Lily replied, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Want to get some rounds in?" I could use help with that collar drag takedown from last week. They were just setting up to begin when Dylan's voice cut through the general hum of the gym. All right, everyone gather up, he called out, clapping his hands for attention. I've got a proposition for the white belts. The activity on the mats gradually came to a halt as people turned toward Dylan. He stood in the center, his black belt contrasting sharply with his white gi, a confident smile playing on his lips. May and Lily exchanged glances before joining the circle forming around him. Competition season is coming up, Dylan announced, and I want to help our newer members understand what real pressure feels like. He looked around the circle, making brief eye contact with each of the white belts present. So here's the deal. Any white belt who can last 30 seconds with me, not win, just survive for 30 seconds, gets a free private lesson. Any position, your choice of starting. A murmur ran through the group. Private lessons with Dylan typically cost $100, and despite his arrogance, his technical knowledge was exceptional. Who's up first? He asked, eyes landing on a muscular white belt named Rob, a former wrestler who had joined the gym about 2 months ago. Rob stepped forward confidently. I'll start in your closed guard, he said, knowing that bottom position was generally considered defensive in Jiu-Jitsu. Dylan nodded, lying on his back and inviting Rob into his guard. Coach Rodriguez held up his phone as a timer. Ready, go! What followed was a masterclass in offensive guard work. Within 12 seconds, Dylan had swept Rob, mounted him, and secured an armbar. Rob tapped hastily as his elbow neared its breaking point. 11 seconds, Coach announced. Who's next? One by one, 4 more white belts tried their luck. The longest anyone lasted was 17 seconds. A stocky blue-collar worker named Pete who had chosen to start on Dylan's back, only to find himself caught in a bow and arrow choke before he could establish proper control. Trevor stood to the side, a purple belt and therefore not eligible for the challenge, smirking as each white belt failed. Anyone else want to embarrass themselves today? He called out when the 5th person tapped to a triangle choke. The gym fell silent as everyone looked around, wondering if any white belts remained. Several had chosen not to participate at all, intimidated by the decisive defeats they'd witnessed. In that moment of quiet, May took a deep breath and stepped forward. The reaction was immediate. Someone snickered. Trevor's eyebrows shot up. Dylan's expression shifted from confident to faintly amused, as if someone had told a joke that wasn't quite funny enough to laugh at out loud. You sure about this? Coach Rodriguez asked her quietly. May nodded, her face calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. 6 months of training, of late nights drilling movements, of her father's wisdom, of being underestimated and dismissed. 6 months had led to this moment. I'll start with taking your back, she said, her voice steady. A few people exchanged glances. Starting with back control was the most advantageous position she could choose. With proper hooks in and control of Dylan's collar, she'd have her best chance at lasting 30 seconds. Dylan shrugged. Your funeral, he said, getting down on all fours to allow her to take the position. May moved behind him, carefully establishing her hooks, her feet positioned inside his thighs to control his hips. She reached for his collar with one hand while securing an over-under grip with her other arm. This was textbook back control, exactly as taught in class. The gym was silent now, all eyes on the unlikely pair in the center of the mat. Coach Rodriguez held up his phone again. Ready, begin! What happened next occurred so quickly that many people later said they missed it if they blinked. As soon as Coach said, begin, Dylan made his move. A standard defense against back control where he would drop his weight to one side, dislodge one of May's hooks and create space to escape. It was a sequence he'd performed successfully thousands of times, but May wasn't where she was supposed to be. In the split second before Dylan moved, she made a minute adjustment to her position. A slight shift of her weight, a repositioning of her hips, a deeper collar grip than the standard approach. These weren't techniques taught in the regular curriculum. They were details her father had shown her, refinements from his years of high-level competition that made the difference between basic technique and mastery. When Dylan dropped his weight, instead of being dislodged, May flowed with his movement. Her grip on his collar tightened precisely as his defense created the space she needed to slide her forearm under his chin. With mechanical precision, her arm formed a V around his neck, one forearm across his windpipe. her bicep and other forearm closing on the sides of his neck like a vice, cutting off the blood flow to his brain. The rear naked choke was locked in before anyone realized what was happening. Dylan's eyes widened in shock as he felt the pressure on his carotid arteries. He tried to tuck his chin to grab her arm to roll, but May's body position neutralized each defense before he could execute it. 4 seconds into the match, Dylan's vision began to tunnel. At 6 seconds, his desperate attempt to stand up was thwarted by May's hooks controlling his hips. At 10 seconds, his hands pawed ineffectively at her locked arms. At 14 seconds, he tapped, 3 firm slaps on her forearm that could not be mistaken. Coach Rodriguez's thumb was still hovering over the stop button on his timer as May released her grip and calmly disengaged her hooks. The display read 0014. The silence that followed was absolute. 20 pairs of eyes stared in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Dylan Chen, the Academy's star black belt, had not only failed to last the full 30 seconds against a middle-aged female white belt, he had been submitted decisively in less than half that time. Dylan sat up slowly, his face flushed with a combination of the choke's effects and what could only be described as pure shock. He turned to look at May, who knelt quietly a few feet away, her expression neither triumphant nor apologetic, just focused, present. That wasn't luck, he said finally, his voice slightly hoarse. May shook her head once. No. Coach Rodriguez cleared his throat, breaking the spell that seemed to have fallen over the room. 14 seconds, he announced unnecessarily. I believe that earns a private lesson. Someone in the back of the room let out a low whistle. Like a dam breaking, the gym erupted in exclamations and questions. How did she... Did you see that adjustment before? I've never seen Dylan tapped that fast. Lily rushed over, her eyes wide. May, that was incredible. Where did you learn that variation? Before May could answer, Dylan got to his feet and approached her. The gym quieted again, everyone watching to see his reaction. His face had regained its normal color, but his typical confidence had been replaced by something new. A thoughtful, assessing look. He extended his hand to May. Good technique, he said simply. It wasn't effusive praise or a dramatic apology for months of dismissive behavior. It was a professional acknowledgement from one practitioner to another, perhaps the most genuine form of respect in martial arts. May took his hand and stood. Thank you. As the initial shock wore off, the open mat session gradually returned to normal. People resumed their drilling and sparring, though now the conversations were punctuated with excited retellings of what they'd just witnessed. May found herself fielding questions and, for the first time since joining the academy, being asked for technical advice. Will you show me that grip adjustment? Asked one white belt. How did you know he was going to move that way? Asked another. Coach Rodriguez watched from the side of the mat, a small smile on his face. The transformation wasn't just in how others saw May, but in how she carried herself, spine a little straighter, movements more assured, voice more confident as she explained the details of the technique. In just 14 seconds, everything had changed. Not because she had something to prove to others, but because she had finally proven something to herself. The Monday evening after the open mat challenge, May arrived at the academy to find the atmosphere noticeably different. As she walked toward the changing room, several students nodded or waved in greeting, people who had never acknowledged her before. Near the water cooler, a group of white belts paused their conversation to watch her pass, their expressions a mix of curiosity and newfound respect. Word had spread quickly. The quiet middle-aged accountant had submitted Dylan Chen, competition champion and the Academy's star black belt, in 14 seconds flat. In the women's changing room, Lily was already getting ready for class. There she is, Lily said with a grin. The gym's newest celebrity. May shook her head, embarrassed by the attention. It was just one technique that worked well. It was more than that, and you know it, Lily replied, tying her belt. Dylan's been tapping white belts and most blue belts like it's nothing for years. What you did wasn't just lucky timing. As May changed into her GI, she considered how to explain without sounding boastful. My father was an elite wrestler before his stroke. The adjustments I made to the rear naked choke, those were details he taught me. Wait, Lily's eyes widened. Your father was a wrestler? You never mentioned that, May shrugged. I didn't want special treatment. I wanted to earn my place here like everyone else. When they walked onto the mats together, May noticed Dylan warming up in the corner. Their eyes met briefly and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't friendship or warmth, but it was acknowledgement, one martial artist to another. Coach Rodriguez started the class with a brief announcement. For those who weren't at Saturday's open mat, we witnessed something special. It reminded me of an important principle in Jiu-Jitsu. Never underestimate your opponent, regardless of their belt color, size, age, or how long they've been training. His eyes swept the room, landing momentarily on Trevor, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting his belt. Respect is earned on the mats, not given based on appearances. The regular class proceeded, focusing on guard retention techniques. When they paired up for drilling, May found herself approached by a young white belt who had started just 2 weeks ago. "Would you mind working with me?" he asked. "I'm having trouble understanding the hip movement." Before Saturday, no newer student had ever sought her out as a drilling partner. She nodded and began to break down the technique step by step, finding that explaining the movements helped clarify them in her own mind as well. During the sparring rounds, May noticed another shift. Her partners were no longer holding back out of condescension or pushing too hard to prove a point. Instead, they engaged with her at an appropriate technical level, challenging but respectful. Even Trevor, paired with her for a 5-minute round, approached the match with a focus on technique rather than domination. After class, as May was gathering her things, Dylan approached her. "I owe you a private lesson," he said without preamble. May looked up, surprised that he was actually following through on the challenge prize. "I'm free Thursday evening," he continued. "We can work on whatever you want. But I'd be interested in seeing those back control details your father taught you." There was genuine curiosity in his voice, perhaps the first time he'd spoken to her without a trace of condescension. "Thursday works," she replied. "And yes, I'd be happy to share those details." He nodded once and turned to leave, then paused. "Your father, he must have been very good." "He was," May said. "Nobuo Chen. He competed internationally before you were born." Dylan's eyes widened slightly. "Chen? As in the Nobuo Chen who took silver at the '84 Olympics?" "You've heard of him?" "Every serious wrestler knows that name." Dylan shook his head slowly. "I had no idea. All this time, that's how I wanted it," May said quietly. "His legacy is his. Whatever I do here needs to be mine." Understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared values despite their differences. Dylan nodded again, this time with unmistakable respect before walking away. In the weeks that followed, the culture at Rio Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy subtly transformed. It wasn't just about how people treated May, though that had certainly changed, but about how newer students were welcomed, regardless of age, body type, or athletic background. The dismissive comments and snickering that had once been common became rare, then practically non-existent. The private lesson with Dylan evolved into a regular weekly exchange. He showed May competition-level techniques that weren't taught in regular classes, and she shared the unique details and principles her father had passed down to her. Their relationship wasn't exactly friendship, but it had developed into something arguably more valuable in the martial arts world. Mutual respect between practitioners with different strengths and experiences. 3 months after the 14-second match. 9 months into May's jiu-jitsu journey, Coach Rodriguez announced an upcoming belt promotion test. White belts who had shown sufficient progress would be evaluated for promotion to blue belt, the first major milestone in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The test will include demonstrating basic techniques, some sparring rounds, and answering questions about principles and positions, he explained after class one evening. Anyone who's been training at least 6 months is eligible to participate. That night, as May drove home, she found herself wondering if she was ready. The blue belt represented a significant commitment, a statement that jiu-jitsu had become part of her identity, not just a temporary interest or a reaction to the parking garage incident that had initially brought her through the academy's doors. When she arrived home, her daughter was sitting at the kitchen table working on homework. "How was ninja training?" she asked, looking up from her textbook. May smiled at their inside joke. "Good. There's a belt test coming up. The blue one you've been working toward?" Her daughter's eyes lit up. "Mom, that's great. Are you going to do it?" Before May could answer, her son walked in from the living room. "She'd better do it," he said. After all the time she's made us practice with her. I haven't decided yet, May replied, though she knew in her heart that she had. The day of the promotion test arrived with a mix of excitement and nervousness. 12 white belts, including May, lined up on the mat in front of Coach Rodriguez, Dylan, and 2 other black belts who would be evaluating them. Family members and other students sat around the edges of the mat, creating an audience that added to the pressure. May spotted her children sitting with her father, who had insisted on coming, despite the difficulty of transporting him from the care facility. Nobuo Chen sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the mat, his eyes alert and proud. The test began with demonstrations of fundamental techniques, guard passes, sweeps, escapes, and basic submissions. Next came specific sparring scenarios, where candidates had to work from predetermined positions. Finally, each person faced 3 rounds of full sparring against opponents of varying skill levels. Throughout it all, May moved with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. Not flashy or aggressive, but precise and efficient, finding the path of least resistance through each challenge, just as her father had taught her. When the practical portions were complete, the black belts huddled together, comparing notes and discussing each candidate. After what felt like an eternity, they returned to the center of the mat. Coach Rodriguez called each candidate forward one by one. Some received their blue belts immediately. Others were given specific feedback on areas to improve before the next testing opportunity. The atmosphere was supportive but serious. No one received a belt they hadn't earned. When May's name was called, she stepped forward and knelt before Coach Rodriguez. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. 9 months ago, a woman walked into this academy looking for a way to never feel helpless again, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Many people didn't think she belonged here. His eyes briefly scanned the room. She proved them wrong, not with words, but with consistent effort, dedication, and humility. He held out a blue belt, crisp and new. This belt isn't given because you submitted a black belt. It's given because you embodied the true spirit of Jiu-Jitsu, using leverage and technique to overcome challenges that seem insurmountable. You've earned this, Mei-chan. As he tied the blue belt around her waist, replacing the white belt she'd worn for 9 months, May felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over her. She bowed deeply, then turned to bow to her father, who nodded in acknowledgement, his eyes shining. 2 weeks later, a new flyer appeared on the academy bulletin board. Women's Self-Defense Program, Sundays 2 to 3:30 p.m. Instructor, Mei Chen, blue belt. Coach Rodriguez had approached her about starting the program, explaining that many women were interested in learning practical self-defense but intimidated by regular classes. They need someone who understands what it's like to start from zero, he'd said. Someone who can show them that it's possible. That Sunday, May arrived early to prepare for her first class. As she arranged the mats, she heard the door open. A woman in her 40s entered hesitantly, clutching a gym bag and looking around with the same nervous expression May recognized from her own first day. Is this the women's self-defense class? She asked. May smiled and walked over to greet her. It is. I'm May, your instructor. The woman relaxed slightly. I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not athletic at all, and I've never done anything like this before. Neither had I 9 months ago, May replied, gesturing for the woman to join her on the mats. Let me tell you a story about my first day here. As more women arrived and gathered around, May realized that her journey had come full circle. What had begun as a personal quest to overcome fear had become something larger, a chance to help others find their own strength, just as she had found hers. The 14-second match that had changed how others saw her was just one moment in a much longer story. The real victory wasn't in beating a black belt. It was in discovering what she was capable of, one patient step at a time.